Please, wake up. We need you. Please. Please wake up.
Row 22, window seat. A 19-year-old student sleeps peacefully. Then the flight attendant shakes her hard, "Wake up." Both pilots collapsed. "You're our only hope." She has 47 hours in tiny training planes. This is a massive Boeing 737. 294 lives depend on her. The fuel gauge shows 3 hours left. She must land this jet or everyone dies. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. The cabin was dark and quiet. It was 1:47 a.m. The red-eye flight was cutting through the night sky at 35,000 feet above Nebraska. Inside the plane, 294 passengers were sleeping. The soft hum of the engines was the only sound. Everything seemed normal. Everything seemed safe. But in exactly 47 seconds, everything was about to change. In row 22, window seat, a young college student was sleeping. Her name was Skylar Reed. She was 19 years old. She had her backpack under her head like a pillow. Her headphones were still in her ears. She was wearing an oversized university hoodie and sweatpants. She looked like any other broke college student trying to save money on a cheap late-night flight. Nobody was paying attention to her. Nobody knew who she was. Nobody knew what she had been studying. And nobody could have imagined that in less than 1 minute, she would become the only person on this entire aircraft who could save everyone's life. Up in the cockpit, something terrible was happening. Captain James Reynolds had been flying commercial jets for 22 years. He was experienced. He was professional. He was one of the best pilots in the airline. But right now, at this exact moment, he was doubled over in his seat. His face was covered in sweat. His stomach felt like it was being twisted into knots. Severe pain shot through his entire body. "I don't feel good," he said to his first officer. His voice was weak. First Officer Sarah Martinez looked over at him. She saw how pale his face was. She saw him shaking. "Captain, are you okay?" she asked with concern. Before he could answer, Captain Reynolds collapsed forward. His head hit the control panel. He was unconscious. Sarah reached for him immediately. "Captain. Captain Reynolds." She tried to shake him awake. She checked his pulse. He was alive, but he wasn't responding. He couldn't open his eyes. He couldn't speak. He couldn't fly. Sarah grabbed the radio to call for help. But before she could speak, she felt it too. The same terrible pain in her stomach, the same weakness spreading through her body. The same dizziness making her vision blur. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." Both pilots had eaten the same crew meal 2 hours ago. The food had been contaminated. Severe food poisoning was hitting both of them at the exact same time. Within 2 minutes, First Officer Martinez collapsed too. She fell back in her seat, unconscious, unable to move, unable to fly. The Boeing 737 kept flying. The autopilot was engaged. It was keeping the plane at 35,000 feet. It was keeping the plane flying straight. But the autopilot couldn't make decisions. It couldn't communicate with air traffic control. It couldn't navigate around weather. And it definitely couldn't land the plane. The plane had about 3 hours and 20 minutes of fuel left. After that, the engines would stop. The plane would fall from the sky. And everyone on board would die. Nobody in the cabin knew anything was wrong yet. They were all sleeping peacefully. But in the back galley, Senior Flight Attendant Patricia Martinez was getting worried. She was First Officer Sarah Martinez's older sister. They worked for the same airline. By pure coincidence, they were both assigned to this same flight tonight. Patricia had been trying to call the cockpit on the intercom for 5 minutes. Nobody was answering. That wasn't normal. Pilots always answered the intercom. Patricia walked to the front of the plane. She knocked on the cockpit door. No answer. She knocked again, louder. Still no answer. Her heart started beating faster. She used her emergency code to unlock the door. What she saw when she opened that door made her blood turn cold. Both pilots were slumped in their seats. Both unconscious. The captain's head was resting on the control panel. Her sister Sarah was leaning back with her eyes closed, breathing but not responding. Sarah. Sarah, wake up. Patricia shook her sister's shoulder. No response. She tried to wake Captain Reynolds. Nothing. She grabbed the oxygen masks that pilots use in emergencies and put them on both pilots' faces. Still nothing. They were breathing, but they were too sick to wake up. Too sick to function, too sick to fly. Patricia's hands started shaking. She had been a flight attendant for 16 years. She had dealt with medical emergencies before. Difficult passengers. Equipment malfunctions. But this? This was different. This was the nightmare scenario every flight attendant feared. Both pilots down. Nobody to fly the plane, nearly 300 people depending on her to find a solution. She looked at the instrument panel. She didn't understand most of it, but she could read the fuel gauge. 3 hours and 18 minutes remaining. The autopilot display showed the plane was maintaining altitude and heading. But that wouldn't last forever. Eventually, something would need to change. And when it did, they needed someone who could actually fly this aircraft. Patricia took a deep breath. She walked out of the cockpit and grabbed the PA microphone. Her voice was shaking when she spoke. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your senior flight attendant. We have a medical emergency with our flight crew. I need to know immediately if anyone on this aircraft has pilot experience. If you are a pilot or have any flight training, please press your call button right now. This is extremely urgent. In the dark cabin, passengers started waking up. Confused murmurs spread through the rows. People looked around nervously. Call buttons were not lighting up. Patricia walked down the aisle, looking at every face. Hoping, praying, searching for someone who could help. Nobody raised their hand. Nobody pressed their call button. Nobody stood up. Her heart sank. Out of 294 passengers, there had to be someone. Anyone. A private pilot. A military pilot. A student pilot, anybody who knew anything about flying. But the cabin was silent except for whispered prayers and growing panic. Patricia felt desperation rising in her chest. She walked back toward the galley, her mind racing. What were they going to do? How could she save all these people? And then she remembered something. A small detail from boarding, hours ago. Something she hadn't thought about until this exact moment. During boarding, she had been helping passengers stow their bags in the overhead bins. A young girl in row 22 had been putting her backpack up. The bag had been opened slightly, and Patricia had noticed a thick aviation textbook inside. The cover had showed a small airplane and had the words, Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge, printed on it. Patricia had smiled at the girl. Studying to be a pilot, she had asked in a friendly way. The girl had looked shy and a little embarrassed. She was young, maybe 19 or 20. Yeah, she had said quietly. I just started flight school. Only a few months in. Patricia had thought it was sweet. A young person chasing their dreams. But she hadn't thought much more about it. It was just a brief moment during a routine boarding process. Now that memory felt like the most important thing in the world. Patricia ran down the aisle to row 22. The girl was still sleeping, her head against the window, headphones in her ears. Patricia grabbed her shoulder and shook her hard. The girl's eyes opened slowly. She pulled out one headphone, confused and disoriented from being woken up suddenly. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice thick with sleep. Patricia's voice came out in a rush, shaking with urgency and fear. "Both pilots are down. Food poisoning. They're unconscious. They can't fly the plane. You said you're in flight school. Please tell me you can help us." The girl's face went completely white. All the sleepiness vanished from her eyes in an instant, replaced by pure shock and terror. What? She couldn't form words. "Can you fly? Do you know how to fly a plane?" Patricia asked desperately. "I've only been training for 3 months," the girl said, her voice rising with panic. "I've never flown anything like this. I've never even been in a cockpit like this." Patricia grabbed both of the girl's shoulders. Tears were forming in her eyes. "You're all we have. Please. 294 people. That's how many people are on this plane. We need you." The girl's name was Skylar Reed. She was 19 years old. She was a sophomore at the University of Nebraska, studying aerospace engineering. She wanted to become a commercial airline pilot someday. It was her dream. It had been her dream since she was a little girl, watching planes take off from the airport near her house. 3 months ago, Skylar had started taking flying lessons at a small flight school near her university. She was using money from her student loans and her part-time job at a campus coffee shop. Flying lessons were expensive. She could barely afford them. But she was determined. Her instructor's name was Steve Morrison. He was patient and encouraging. He had been teaching people to fly for 25 years. So far, Skylar had logged exactly 47 hours of total flight time. 30 hours were with Steve sitting next to her in the instructor's seat, teaching her everything. The other 17 hours were solo flights, where she flew alone after Steve thought she was ready. All of those 47 hours had been in the same aircraft, a Cessna 172. It was a small, single-engine propeller plane with 4 seats. It was the type of plane that student pilots learn in. It was simple. It was slow. It weighed about 2,400 pounds when fully loaded. The Boeing 737 they were currently flying in weighed over 130,000 pounds. It had 2 powerful jet engines. It had sophisticated computer systems. It had hundreds of controls and switches and displays that Skylar had only seen in textbooks and videos. Skylar had recently passed her first solo flight evaluation. It was a big milestone in pilot training. It meant she could fly a small airplane by herself around the airport traffic pattern and land safely. She was proud of that achievement. But she was still studying for her private pilot written exam. She hadn't even earned her private pilot license yet. She was literally at the very beginning of her aviation training. She knew basic aerodynamics. She knew basic procedures. But everything was theoretical or limited to small, simple aircraft. She had never touched the controls of a jet. She had never used turbine engines. She had never operated complex navigation systems or autopilot or any of the advanced equipment that commercial pilots used every single day. On her best days, she could land her little Cessna smoothly about half the time. The other half, her landings were rough and bumpy. Steve was still teaching her how to improve her landing technique. And now this flight attendant was telling her she needed to land a Boeing 737. Skylar felt like she was going to throw up. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Her hands were shaking. Her legs felt weak. "I can't do this," she whispered. "I'll kill everyone. I don't know how." "If you don't try, we all die anyway," Patricia said. Her voice was steady now, even though tears were running down her face. "The plane has about 3 hours of fuel left. After that, we crash. You're our only chance." Other passengers nearby were waking up now. They could hear the conversation. They could hear the fear in both voices. Word was spreading through the cabin. Both pilots down. A student pilot being asked to fly. Panic was starting to build. Skylar closed her eyes. She thought about her instructor Steve. She thought about something he said to her during her very first lesson, when she was terrified to even touch the controls. Aviation is about making decisions with incomplete information, Steve had told her. You'll never have perfect knowledge of every situation. You'll never have all the answers. But you learn to make the best decision you can with what you know. That's what being a pilot means. Skylar opened her eyes. She looked at Patricia. Then she looked past her at all the passengers who were now awake and staring at her with desperate hope in their eyes. She thought about the alternative. Doing nothing. Letting the plane fly until the fuel ran out. Everyone dying because she was too scared to try. Or trying, maybe failing, maybe crashing anyway, but at least trying. At least giving everyone a chance. Okay, Skylar said quietly. Her voice was barely a whisper. I'll try. Patricia helped her unbuckle her seatbelt. Skylar stood up on shaking legs. She felt like she might collapse. Every instinct in her body was screaming at her to sit back down, to tell them to find someone else, to admit this was beyond her. But there was nobody else. Patricia led her to the front of the cabin. Every passenger was awake now. All 294 of them, all staring at her. The cabin lights had been turned on. Skylar could see every face clearly. Young people, old people, parents holding children, business people, students, all of them looking at her like she was their savior. But she wasn't a savior. She was a terrified college student who barely knew how to fly. Patricia handed her the PA microphone. Skylar's hand was shaking so badly she almost dropped it. She took a deep breath. She knew she had to tell them the truth. They deserved to know what they were facing. My name is Skylar Reed, she said into the microphone. Her voice was cracking. She could hear it echoing through the cabin speakers. I'm 19 years old. I'm a student pilot. I've been training for 3 months. I have 47 hours of total flight time, all of it in a small, single-engine Cessna airplane. She paused. She could see the hope fading from some faces, being replaced by fear. I've never flown a jet before, she continued. I've never landed anything bigger than a 4-seat training plane. I don't know if I can do this. I really don't know. But I'm going to try, because there's nobody else who can. The cabin was completely silent for a moment. Then a man in first class stood up. He was wearing an expensive suit. His face was red with anger. This is insane, he shouted. You're going to kill us all. She's a kid. She doesn't know what she's doing. A few other passengers murmured in agreement, their fear turning to panic. But then something happened that Skylar didn't expect. A young woman in row 14 stood up. She was holding a baby girl, maybe 8 or 9 months old. The mother's eyes were filled with tears, but her voice was strong and clear. You're our only hope, she said, looking directly at Skylar. I believe in you. We believe in you. An elderly man in row 18 stood up next. You're brave for trying, he said. That takes courage. More passengers started standing. One by one, they voiced their support. You can do this. We trust you. You're going to save us. God is with you. The businessman who had yelled sat back down, his anger deflating into resignation and fear, but he didn't say anything else. Skylar felt tears starting to form in her eyes, but she blinked them back. She couldn't afford to cry right now. She needed to stay focused. She handed the microphone back to Patricia and started walking toward the cockpit. Every step felt impossible. Her legs were shaking so badly she had to use the seat backs to steady herself. Passengers reached out to touch her arm as she passed, offering silent prayers and encouragement. When she reached the cockpit door, she paused. This was it. The moment she stepped through that door, she would be accepting responsibility for 294 lives. If she failed, if she crashed, every single person on this plane would die because of her decisions. She could still turn back. She could tell them she couldn't do it. She could. No. She couldn't. There was no one else. This was the only option. Skylar stepped into the cockpit. The scene was worse than she had imagined. Captain Reynolds was slumped forward, his head resting on the control panel. First Officer Martinez was leaning back in her seat, unconscious, breathing but unresponsive. Both of them were clearly very sick. But it was the instrument panel that made Skylar's heart sink into her stomach. It looked nothing like her training aircraft. Absolutely nothing. In the Cessna 172 she trained in, there were maybe 20 or 30 instruments and controls. Simple analog gauges. A few basic switches. Everything was straightforward and easy to understand. This cockpit had hundreds of displays, switches, buttons, and controls. 6 large computer screens dominated the panel, showing information she barely understood. The overhead panel had dozens of switches and circuit breakers. The center console had throttle levers, more switches, more displays. Everything was digital and complex and sophisticated. Skylar felt panic rising in her chest like a wave about to crash over her. She had studied Boeing 737 systems in her aerospace engineering classes. She had read about them in textbooks. She had watched videos online. She knew the theory. She knew what the different systems were supposed to do. But knowing theory and actually operating the aircraft were completely different things. Her eyes scanned the main panel. She found the primary flight display in front of the captain's seat. It showed their altitude, 35,000 feet. Airspeed, 485 knots. Heading, 270 degrees, flying due west. The autopilot was engaged, showing CMD on the display. She looked at the fuel gauge. 3 hours and 17 minutes of fuel remaining. The clock showed 1:53 a.m. This was real. This was actually happening. Patricia had followed her into the cockpit. "What do you need me to do?" she asked. "I need to call for help," Skylar said. Her voice didn't sound like her own. "I need to talk to air traffic control." She looked at the radio panel. It was in the center console, between the 2 pilot seats. She had used radios before in her training, but this one looked different. More complex. She found what looked like the microphone button and pressed it. She took a deep breath and spoke. "Mayday, mayday, mayday." Her voice was shaking. "This is... I don't know the flight number. This is a Boeing 737. I think we're somewhere over the Midwest. Both pilots are unconscious. They can't fly. I'm a student pilot. I have 47 hours of training. I need help. I need someone to help me land this plane." For a moment, there was only static. Then a voice came back, professional but clearly shocked. "Aircraft calling Mayday, this is Kansas City Center. Say again your situation." "Both pilots are unconscious from food poisoning," Skylar said, speaking faster now. "I'm a student pilot. I've only flown small planes. I've never flown a jet. I need guidance. I need someone to tell me what to do." "Understood. Stand by." There was a pause. Then the controller's voice came back. "I need you to squawk 7700 on your transponder." "Do you know where the transponder is?" Skylar looked around the panel desperately. "No. I don't know where that is." The controller's voice remained calm and patient. "Okay, that's okay. Look at the center pedestal between the 2 pilot seats. You should see a small display with numbers on it. It might say XPDR or transponder above it. Skylar looked down at the center console. She found it. A small display showing 4 numbers. I found it, she said. Good. Now I need you to turn the numbers to 7700. There should be knobs or buttons to change each digit. Skylar's hands were shaking as she changed the numbers. It took her 3 tries to get it right. Okay. It says 7700 now. Perfect. I have you on radar now. You're showing 40 miles northwest of Kansas City. Altitude 35,000 feet. Aircraft is a Boeing 737-800, is that correct? Yes, Skylar said. She had no idea how the controller knew that, but she was grateful. Okay, listen carefully. You're doing great so far. The airplane is flying itself right now on autopilot. That's good. It's safe. We have time to figure this out. Do you understand? Yes. Skylar felt a tiny bit of relief. Time. They had time. What's your name? The controller asked. Skylar. Skylar Reed. Okay, Skylar. My name is Dave. I'm going to help you through this. First thing I need to do is get you connected with someone who can talk you through the flying procedures. Can you tell me where you've been taking flight lessons? Lincoln Flight School. In Lincoln, Nebraska. My instructor's name is Steve Morrison. Perfect. Hold on 1 minute. Skylar waited, her heart pounding. She could hear radio chatter in the background as multiple controllers coordinated her emergency. She heard phrases like, "Clear all traffic," and "Notify Denver," and "Get that flight instructor on the line immediately." Patricia was standing behind her, one hand on Skylar's shoulder, offering silent support. After what felt like forever but was probably only 2 minutes, Dave's voice came back. Skylar, we're contacting your flight school right now. We're going to patch your instructor through to talk directly to you. In the meantime, I need you to just monitor the instruments. Tell me if anything changes. The autopilot is doing all the flying right now. You don't need to touch anything yet. Okay. Okay, Skylar said. She stared at the instruments, trying to understand everything she was seeing. 15 miles away, in a quiet suburban neighborhood of Lincoln, Nebraska, Steve Morrison was sitting at his dinner table. He had just finished eating meatloaf and mashed potatoes. He was reading a flying magazine and enjoying a quiet Sunday evening. His cell phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer it. He got a lot of spam calls. But something made him pick up. Hello. Is this Steve Morrison, flight instructor at Lincoln Flight School? The voice was urgent, official. Yes, this is Steve. Who's calling? Mr. Morrison, this is Kansas City Air Route Traffic Control Center. We have an emergency situation. One of your students, Skylar Reed, is currently attempting to fly a Boeing 737 with both pilots incapacitated. She's requesting your assistance. We need you to talk her through landing procedures. Steve dropped his fork. It clattered against his plate. What? Skylar. She's in a 737. Yes, sir. Both pilots suffered food poisoning. She's the only person on board with any flight training. She's asking for you specifically. We're setting up a direct radio link to the aircraft. Can you get to your flight school immediately? We need you on the radio with her as soon as possible. Steve was already grabbing his car keys. I'm leaving right now. I'll be there in 12 minutes. He ran out his front door, not bothering to lock it, jumped into his truck, and drove faster than he had ever driven in his life. His mind was racing. Skylar, sweet, determined Skylar who had shown up at the flight school 3 months ago with stars in her eyes and a dream of becoming an airline pilot. Who had been nervous during every single lesson but pushed through her fear anyway. Who had cried tears of joy after her first solo flight. Skylar with only 47 hours of flight time. Trying to land a Boeing 737. Steve ran 3 red lights on the way to the flight school. He didn't care. He parked crooked in the lot and sprinted to the building. The door was already unlocked. Inside, 2 FAA officials and an airline pilot were setting up radio equipment, connecting to the air traffic control frequency. Steve Morrison, one of the FAA officials asked. "That's me. We're almost ready. She's on this frequency. When you key the mic, you'll be talking directly to her." They handed him a headset. Steve put it on, his hands shaking slightly. He keyed the microphone. "Skylar. It's Steve. Can you hear me?" There was a pause. Then he heard her voice, and his heart broke at how terrified she sounded. "Steve." She sounded like she was about to cry. "Steve, I'm so scared. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know how to fly this thing." Steve took a deep breath. He forced his voice to sound calm, confident, reassuring. It was the same voice he used during flight lessons when students got nervous. The voice that said everything is going to be okay. "Skylar, listen to me. I need you to take a deep breath. Can you do that for me?" He heard her breathing in and out over the radio. "Good," he continued. "Now listen. You know more than you think you do. You've been training for 3 months. You understand how airplanes work. You understand the principles of flight. This is just a bigger airplane. The fundamentals are the same. But I've never," her voice cracked. "I know," Steve said gently. "I know you've never flown a jet. But we're going to do this together. Step by step. Just like every flight lesson we've ever done. I'm going to talk you through everything. You're going to listen and follow my instructions. And we're going to get you on the ground safely. Do you trust me?" There was a pause. "Yes," Skylar said quietly. "I trust you." "Good. Now, tell me what you see in front of you. Describe the instrument panel." Skylar started describing what she saw. The 6 main screens, the throttle levers. The various switches and controls. As she talked, Steve could hear her voice becoming steadier. The act of focusing on something concrete was helping her calm down. Steve had never flown a Boeing 737 himself. He was a flight instructor who taught in small aircraft. But he had studied jet systems. He had friends who flew for airlines. And he understood the basic principles. More importantly, he understood Skylar. He knew how she learned. He knew what she needed to hear. "Okay," Steve said. "I want you to find the primary flight display. It's the screen directly in front of the captain's seat. Do you see it?" "Yes." "Tell me what it shows." "Altitude is 35,000 feet. Airspeed is 485 knots. Is that right?" "That's right." "Good. You're reading it correctly. What else?" "Heading is 270 degrees. There's a little message that says CMD and autopilot engaged." "Perfect. That's exactly what I wanted to hear. The autopilot is flying the plane right now. That's why everything feels stable. Now, do you remember from your training what I always told you about the first rule of flying?" Skylar thought for a moment. "Fly the airplane first. Navigate second. Communicate third." "Exactly. Right now, the autopilot is flying the airplane for you. That gives us time to plan. So let's talk about navigation. Where are we trying to go?" The air traffic controller's voice broke in. "Steve, this is Kansas City Center. Aircraft is currently 42 miles northwest of Kansas City. We're recommending Denver International Airport as the landing site. It's about 200 miles southwest of current position. They have the longest runways and full emergency equipment standing by. Copy that, Steve said. Skylar, did you hear that? Yes. Denver. 200 miles away. Good. How much fuel do you have? The display says 3 hours and 14 minutes remaining. Okay, plenty of fuel. No rush. We have time to do this right. Now, remember your first solo flight? Yes, Skylar said softly. You were terrified that day. You told me you couldn't do it. You said you weren't ready. Do you remember what I told you? You said I was ready. You said you believed in me. And what happened? I flew the pattern and landed. 3 times. Exactly. You did it. You were scared, but you did it anyway. This is the same thing, Skylar. Just a bigger airplane. The principles are the same. Aircraft is aircraft. Physics is physics. You understand how lift works. You understand how drag works. You understand how to control an airplane. Trust your training. Trust yourself. Steve heard Skylar take another deep breath. Okay, she said. Okay. What do I do first? First, we're going to get you comfortable with the controls. I want you to put your hands on the yoke. The control wheel in front of you. Don't move it yet. Just hold it and feel it. Okay. I'm holding it. Good. Now I need to explain something. Right now the autopilot is flying. But eventually, we're going to need to disconnect it so you can manually fly the approach and landing. When we do that, you're going to feel the weight of the airplane. It's going to feel much heavier than the Cessna. The controls are going to be more sensitive in some ways and less sensitive in others. But the concept is the same. Push forward, the nose goes down. Pull back, the nose goes up. Turn the wheel left, the airplane banks left. Turn it right, it banks right. Same as the Cessna, just bigger. Understand? Yes. We're not going to disconnect the autopilot yet. Not for a while. But I want you to get familiar with where everything is. Can you find the throttles? Yes. They're on the center console. 2 big levers. Right. Those control engine power. Just like in the Cessna, except you have 2 engines instead of 1. Push them forward, engines produce more power. Pull them back, less power. Same concept. They continued like this for 20 minutes. Steve methodically walked Skylar through every important control and instrument. Where the flap lever was, where the landing gear lever was, how to read the navigation display, how to read the engine instruments. Skylar's voice grew steadier with each answer. The panic was still there, but it was being pushed back by focus and concentration. Finally, Steve said, "Okay. It's time to start heading toward Denver. We need to turn the airplane and start descending. The autopilot can do most of this for us, but you need to tell it what to do. Do you see a panel above the main instrument displays? It probably says MCP or something similar. It has a bunch of knobs and buttons." "I see it," Skylar said. "That's the mode control panel. It's how you communicate with the autopilot. There should be a knob labeled HDG or heading. Do you see it?" "Yes." "Good. What number does it currently show?" 270. "Okay. I need you to turn that knob to the left, counterclockwise, until it shows 220. That's going to tell the autopilot to turn the airplane toward Denver." Skylar turned the knob carefully. "It says 220 now." "Perfect. Now you should see a button near that knob. It might say HDG SEL or just HDG. Press it." Skylar pressed the button. Immediately, she felt the airplane begin to bank to the left. The wings tilted. The nose started turning. "It's turning," she said, alarm in her voice. "That's good. Steve said quickly. That's exactly what's supposed to happen. The autopilot is turning the airplane. Just watch the instruments. Watch the heading change. Skylar watched as the heading display slowly counted down. 270, 265. 260, 255. The turn was smooth and gentle. At 220 degrees, the airplane rolled back to level flight, pointing southwest toward Denver. It stopped turning, Skylar reported. Perfect. You just commanded the autopilot to turn the airplane, and it did exactly what you told it to do. See? You're flying this thing. For the first time, Skylar felt a tiny flicker of something other than fear. Maybe confidence was too strong a word. But she had just made the airplane do what she wanted. That was something. Now we need to descend, Steve said. We're at 35,000 feet. We need to get down to around 10,000 feet before we start the approach to Denver. Do you see another knob on that mode control panel, maybe labeled Alt or Altitude? Yes. It shows 35,000 right now. Good. I want you to turn that knob counterclockwise until it shows 10,000. Skylar turned it. Okay. 10,000. Now look for a vertical speed button, maybe labeled V/S or vertical speed. Press it, then there should be a wheel or knob you can use to set a descent rate. I want you to set it to -1,000 feet per minute. That's a gentle descent. It took Skylar a minute to find the right controls, but she managed it. The airplane's nose pitched down slightly, and the altimeter started decreasing. We're descending, she said. Beautiful. You're doing great, Skylar. Really great. The air traffic controller broke in again. Aircraft, Kansas City Center. You're cleared to descend to 10,000 feet. Denver is coordinating emergency equipment. Runway 16 right will be cleared for you. It's the longest runway they have, over 12,000 feet. Copy that, Steve said. Then to Skylar, did you hear that? Yes. Okay. So here's the plan. We're going to descend down to 10,000 feet. That's going to take about 25 minutes at this rate. During that time, I'm going to teach you how to manually disconnect the autopilot and hand-fly the airplane. We're going to practice gentle turns and altitude changes while we still have plenty of time and altitude. Once you're comfortable, we'll set up for the approach to Denver. Air traffic control is going to vector us, that means tell us which direction to turn, until we're lined up with the runway. Then we're going to descend slowly, deploy the flaps and landing gear, and you're going to land this airplane. Okay. Skylar felt the fear rushing back. Steve, I don't know if I can land it. The runway is going to come up so fast. What if I'm too high? What if I'm too low? What if? Skylar, stop, Steve said firmly but gently. You're getting ahead of yourself. We're not landing yet. We're 25 minutes away from even starting the approach. Right now, all I need you to do is descend to 10,000 feet. That's it. One step at a time. Can you do that? Skylar took another deep breath. Yes. I can do that. Good girl. Now watch your instruments. Make sure the descent rate stays around -1,000 feet per minute. If it changes, let me know. The next 20 minutes felt like the longest of Skylar's life. She sat in the captain's seat, her hands gripping the yoke even though the autopilot was still flying. Her eyes moved constantly between the altimeter, the airspeed indicator, the vertical speed indicator, and the navigation display. Behind her, Patricia had brought her a bottle of water and a granola bar. You need to keep your energy up, the flight attendant said softly. Skylar hadn't realized how dry her mouth was until she took a sip. Her hands were still shaking, but not as badly as before. She forced herself to eat half the granola bar, even though her stomach was in knots. The altitude slowly decreased. 30,000 feet. 25,000, 20,000. 15,000. At 12,000 feet, Steve's voice came back. Okay, Skylar. We're getting close to 10,000. I need you to find the altitude knob again and turn it to level off at 10,000. The autopilot will do the leveling for you. Skylar did as instructed. At exactly 10,000 feet, the airplane's nose pitched up slightly and the descent stopped. The vertical speed indicator showed 0. They were flying level again. Perfect, Steve said. Now comes the hard part. I need to teach you how to disconnect the autopilot and fly manually. Are you ready? No, Skylar thought. I'm not ready. I'll never be ready. But out loud, she said, yes. Okay. Look at the control yoke in front of you. On the left side, there should be a red button. That's the autopilot disconnect button. When you press it, the autopilot will turn off and you'll be flying the airplane manually. But before we do that, I want you to practice something. I want you to rest your hands very lightly on the yoke. Don't grip it, just rest your hands on it. Feel what the autopilot is doing. Skylar placed her hands on the yoke. She could feel tiny movements as the autopilot made small corrections to keep the airplane level and on course. Good, Steve said. Now, I'm going to have you disconnect the autopilot on the count of 3. When you do, the airplane is going to feel heavy. It's going to want to do things. Your job is to keep it flying straight and level. Don't make any big movements. Small, gentle corrections. Just like in the Cessna, except the controls are heavier and the airplane responds more slowly. Ready? Ready, Skylar lied. 1, 2, 3. Press the button. Skylar pressed the red button. Immediately, she heard a disconnect warning sound, a single chime. The CMD message on the primary flight display disappeared. And suddenly, she was flying. The yoke felt heavy in her hands, much heavier than the Cessna's controls. The airplane seemed to have a mind of its own, wanting to bank slightly to the left. Skylar corrected, turning the wheel gently to the right. But she turned it too much, and the airplane banked to the right. She corrected back to the left. Too much again. She was over-controlling, making the airplane wobble back and forth. Relax, Steve's voice was calm and steady. You're working too hard. Let the airplane fly itself. It wants to stay stable. Stop chasing it. Make smaller corrections. Tiny movements. Skylar forced herself to relax her grip. She made smaller corrections. Slowly, gradually, the airplane steadied. After 2 minutes that felt like 2 hours, she was flying relatively straight and level. There you go, Steve said. She could hear the smile in his voice. You're flying a Boeing 737. How does it feel? Terrifying, Skylar said honestly. Steve laughed, a warm sound that made her feel slightly better. Fair enough. Now I want you to practice some gentle turns. Turn the yoke slightly to the left. Just a little bit. Bank the airplane maybe 10 degrees. Skylar turned the wheel. The airplane banked to the left, and she felt herself being pulled slightly in her seat by the turn. Good. Now roll back to level. She did. It took a few seconds, but she managed to level the wings. Now try a turn to the right. They practiced for 15 minutes. Gentle turns left and right. Slight climbs and descents. Skylar's confidence grew with each maneuver. She was still terrified, but she was starting to understand how the airplane responded. It was slower than the Cessna, more stable, but the principles were exactly the same. You're doing great, Steve said. Really, really great. I'm proud of you, Skylar. Those words almost made her cry. She blinked back tears and focused on the instruments. The air traffic controller's voice broke in. Aircraft, Denver approach control. We have you 50 miles northeast of Denver. Weather is clear, winds are calm. Runway 16 right is ready for you. Fire equipment is standing by. We're going to vector you for a long, straight-in approach. Do you understand? Yes, Skylar said. Good. Turn right heading 210. Skylar turned the yoke, banking the airplane to the right until the heading indicator showed 210 degrees. She was getting better at this. Perfect, the controller said. Maintain that heading. Descend to 7,000 feet. Steve's voice, okay, Skylar. We're starting the approach now. This is going to be a long, gradual descent all the way to the runway. I need you to reduce your power slightly. Pull the throttles back just a little bit, maybe halfway. The airplane will start descending. Skylar reached for the throttle levers. They were big and heavy. She pulled them back slowly. The engine sound changed, becoming quieter. The nose dropped slightly, and the airplane began descending. Watch your airspeed, Steve said. We want to keep it around 250 knots for now. If you're going too fast, reduce power more. If you're going too slow, add power. Skylar watched the airspeed indicator like a hawk. It showed 260 knots. Too fast. She reduced power a little more. The speed decreased to 250 knots and stabilized there. Beautiful, Steve said. They descended to 7,000 feet. Then the controller gave them another turn and told them to descend to 5,000 feet. The ground was getting closer. Skylar could see the lights of Denver in the distance, a sprawling galaxy of orange and white lights against the dark landscape. Okay, Skylar, Steve said. His voice was still calm, but she could hear the tension underneath. This was it. They were really going to do this. We're about 20 miles from the runway. It's time to start configuring the airplane for landing. First, we need to slow down. I need you to reduce power more and bring the speed down to about 180 knots. Skylar pulled the throttles back further. The airplane slowed. Good. Now, we need to extend the flaps. Flaps are surfaces on the wings that increase lift at slower speeds. They let us fly slower without stalling. Do you see the flap lever? It's on the center console, probably between the pilot's seats. I see it, Skylar said. It was a large lever with numbers on it, 0, 1, 5, 10, 15, 25, 30, 40. Right now it should be at 0. I want you to move it to position 1. Skylar moved the lever. She felt a slight vibration as the flaps extended. The airplane's nose pitched up slightly. Did you feel that pitch change? Steve asked. Yes. That's normal. The flaps change the aerodynamics. Just hold the nose level. You might need to trim the airplane. Do you see a small wheel on the center console, probably labeled trim or stabilizer trim? Skylar found it. Yes. Roll it forward slightly, away from you, until the control pressure feels balanced. Skylar turned the wheel. Immediately, the pressure on the yoke decreased. The airplane felt more stable. Perfect. Now, air traffic control is going to turn us onto what's called final approach. That means we'll be pointing straight at the runway. Once we're lined up, we're going to continue descending, extend more flaps, put the landing gear down, and land. Okay. Okay, Skylar said. Her heart was pounding so hard she could barely hear. The controller's voice, aircraft, turn left heading 160. You're 10 miles from the runway. Descend to 3,000 feet. You're cleared for the approach. Skylar turned the airplane and began descending. She could see the runway now in the distance, a long strip of lights pointing straight ahead like an arrow. Skylar, Steve said gently. I need you to listen to me very carefully. This is going to work. You're going to land this airplane. I know you're scared. I know this seems impossible. But you've done everything perfectly so far. Everything. You're going to keep doing it perfectly for the next 10 minutes, and then you're going to be on the ground, and everyone is going to be safe. Do you believe me? Skylar looked at the runway lights ahead. She thought about the 294 people behind her. The young mother with her baby, the elderly man. Patricia, who had woken her up and trusted her with all these lives. The unconscious pilots who couldn't save themselves. She thought about her instructor Steve, talking her through this impossible situation from the ground. She thought about her dream of becoming a pilot. This wasn't how she'd imagined it would happen. This wasn't what she'd signed up for. But here she was, flying a jet, doing something that should have been impossible. Yes, she said. I believe you. Good. Now, we're at 5 miles. Extend the flaps to position 5. Skylar moved the flap lever. More vibration. The airplane slowed further. 3 miles. Extend flaps to 15. She did. Okay, now we need to put the landing gear down. Find the landing gear lever. It's probably a large lever with a wheel-shaped handle. Skylar found it. Her hand was shaking as she grabbed it. Pull it down, Steve said. She pulled. There was a loud mechanical sound as the landing gear extended. 3 green lights illuminated on the panel, showing all 3 landing gear were down and locked. I have 3 green lights, Skylar reported. Perfect. 2 miles from the runway. Extend flaps to 30. The airplane was getting slower and slower. The nose was pitched up now, the landing attitude. Through the windscreen, Skylar could see the runway clearly. It was enormous, much bigger than anything she'd ever landed on. But it was also rushing toward her very quickly. 1 mile, flaps to 40. That's full flaps. This is your landing configuration. Skylar extended the flaps to 40. The airplane slowed to about 140 knots. Okay, Skylar, listen. You're going to fly this airplane all the way to the runway. Keep it lined up with the center line. See those lights going down the middle of the runway? Yes. Keep the airplane pointed at those. As you get close to the ground, you're going to slowly pull back on the yoke to flare. That means raising the nose slightly so the back wheels touch down first. Just like in the Cessna. Exactly like in the Cessna. Once you feel the wheels touch, pull the throttles all the way back to idle and let the airplane settle onto the runway. Then use the brakes. There are pedals at your feet, the tops of the rudder pedals. Press them gently to slow down. Do you understand? Yes. Half a mile. You're doing great. Keep it coming. Skylar's hands were gripping the yoke so tightly her knuckles were white. The runway was filling her entire field of view now. The ground was rushing up at her. Too fast, her mind screamed. We're going too fast. We're too high. We're going to crash. But Steve's voice was in her ear, calm and steady. You're on glide path. You're perfect. Just keep it coming. Keep flying. 50 feet above the ground. 40.30. Skylar could see the runway surface clearly now. She could see the markings. The lights were rushing past on both sides. Start your flare. Ease back on the yoke. Gentle. Gentle. 20 feet. 15. Skylar pulled back on the yoke. The nose came up slightly. 10 feet. 5. There was a screech as the main landing gear touched the runway. The airplane bounced slightly, then settled. Skylar pulled the throttles all the way back. The nose gear touched down with a solid thump. They were on the ground. Brakes. Steve shouted. Press the brakes. Skylar pressed the tops of the rudder pedals. The airplane began slowing. She pressed harder. The brakes were powerful, much more powerful than the Cessna's. The airplane decelerated rapidly. They were slowing. Slowing. And then they stopped. The Boeing 737 sat motionless on the runway of Denver International Airport. All engines running. All systems functioning, all 294 passengers and crew alive. For a moment, there was complete silence on the radio. Then Steve's voice, cracking with emotion, "Skylar, you did it. You just landed a Boeing 737. Skylar sat frozen in the captain's seat. Her hands were still gripping the yoke. She couldn't process what had just happened. She couldn't believe it was over. Behind her, she heard a sound. She turned around. Patricia was standing in the cockpit doorway, tears streaming down her face. Behind her, Skylar could see the cabin. Every single passenger was on their feet, cheering, applauding, crying. The young mother was holding her baby up, both of them safe. The elderly man was wiping tears from his eyes. Even the businessman in first class was clapping. Emergency vehicles surrounded the airplane, their lights flashing. Paramedics were rushing toward the aircraft to treat the unconscious pilots. Skylar unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up on shaking legs. She walked out of the cockpit into the cabin. The applause grew louder. Passengers were reaching out to touch her, to hug her, to thank her. She made it halfway down the aisle before her legs gave out. She collapsed into an empty seat, and finally, the tears came. She had done it. She had actually done it. A 19-year-old college student with 47 hours of flight time had just saved 294 lives. Skylar sat in a conference room at the National Transportation Safety Board headquarters. Across from her sat investigators, FAA officials, and airline executives. They had been interviewing her for 2 hours, going over every detail of that night. Both pilots had made full recoveries. The contaminated crew meal had been traced back to a catering facility that was immediately shut down. Captain Reynolds and First Officer Martinez had both requested to meet Skylar personally to thank her. The airline had offered her a full scholarship for flight training. Several airlines had already contacted her with job offers for when she completed her commercial pilot certification. The story had gone viral. "Student pilot saves 294 lives," was headline news around the world. Skylar's face was on every news channel. But right now, in this quiet conference room, the lead NTSB investigator was looking at her with profound respect. "Ms. Reed," he said. "In my 30 years investigating aviation incidents, I have never seen anything like this. What you did was, well, it should have been impossible. The statistical probability of successfully landing a commercial jet with your level of experience was effectively zero. Yet you did it. Can you tell me, in your own words, how you managed it?" Skylar thought about the question. She thought about that terrifying moment when Patricia had woken her up. The panic she'd felt. The fear, the certainty that she would fail. She thought about Steve's voice on the radio, calm and confident, believing in her when she didn't believe in herself. She thought about all those hours in the Cessna, practicing takeoffs and landings, learning the fundamentals, building skills that she never imagined she would need so desperately. "I had a good instructor," she said simply. "And I remembered what he taught me. Fly the airplane. One step at a time. Don't think about the whole task, just focus on the next thing you need to do. Trust your training. And never, ever give up." The investigator nodded slowly. That's actually the best explanation I've heard for how good pilots operate under pressure. You did what experienced captains do. You flew the airplane, managed the situation, and got everyone home safely." He closed his folder and looked at her seriously. "Ms. Reed, when you finish your training and get your commercial pilot license, I hope you'll consider a career with the airlines. The industry needs pilots like you. Pilots who can stay calm under impossible pressure, pilots who don't give up. We need people like you in the cockpit. Skylar felt a warmth spreading through her chest. 6 months ago, being an airline pilot had seemed like a distant, impossible dream. Now, sitting here, being told by federal investigators that she belonged in this profession. "Thank you," she said. "That means everything to me." Captain Skylar Reed sat in the left seat of a Boeing 737, exactly where she belonged. She was now 25 years old. The fourth stripe on her uniform sleeves indicated her rank, captain. She had completed her commercial training in record time. The airline had hired her as a first officer at age 22, the youngest in the company's history. 3 years later, she'd been promoted to captain. Her first officer today was a man named Marcus Chen, an experienced pilot with 15 years of flying. He had specifically requested to fly with her. "You know," Marcus said as they completed their pre-flight checks, "when I first heard I'd be flying with the famous Skylar Reed, I wasn't sure what to expect. The student pilot who landed with both pilots down. I thought maybe it was just luck. But after flying with you this past month, you're one of the best captains I've ever worked with. Natural instincts. Calm under pressure. You make it look easy." Skylar smiled. "It's never easy. Every flight, I remember that night. I remember how scared I was. I remember thinking I couldn't do it. And I use that. It keeps me humble. It keeps me sharp. It reminds me that every flight matters, every passenger matters, and I need to bring my absolute best every single time." "That's why you're a great captain," Marcus said. The flight attendant's voice came over the intercom. "Captain, we're ready for boarding." Skylar keyed the microphone. "Copy that. Start boarding." As passengers began filing onto the aircraft, Skylar watched them through the cockpit window's reflection. Families, business travelers, students, people with places to go, lives to live, dreams to chase. Every single one of them was trusting her to get them there safely. She thought about that terrified 19-year-old girl who had been shaken awake in row 22, who had faced an impossible situation and somehow found the courage to try anyway. That girl had discovered something important that night: courage isn't the absence of fear. Courage is being absolutely terrified and doing what needs to be done anyway. Skylar completed her final checks, put on her headset, and prepared for pushback. She was ready. She was always ready. Because 294 people had depended on her once, and she had brought them home. And now, every flight, she would do the same thing. One flight at a time. One landing at a time. One decision at a time. Exactly the way Steve had taught her. Denver Tower, this is Flight 447, ready for pushback. Flight 447, cleared to push. Captain Skylar Reed smiled. Time to fly.